When I came back from the Army, I saw that my parents had sold my vintage car to buy one for themselves. They just said, "We thought you might not return." The car was just sitting there, and we needed a vehicle. But now they truly regret what they did to me. So here I am, Nick, 29 years old, and I just got back from 3 years in the Army. Afghanistan, Qatar, Germany. The whole tour package that nobody really asked for, but somehow you end up getting anyway. The only thing that kept me sane during those long nights in the desert was thinking about my '68 Camaro SS. Not just any Camaro, MY Camaro that me and my old man had been building together before I shipped out. This wasn't some weekend warrior project either. We're talking about a car I literally bled over. I welded those quarter panels myself. Spent entire weekends sanding every single inch of metal until my arms felt like they were going to fall off. I even reupholstered the seats by hand because I couldn't find the exact pattern I wanted anywhere. The thing was my baby, my masterpiece, my ticket to feeling like I actually accomplished something meaningful in this world. Every time some rocket would go off in the distance, or I'd have to pull another all-nighter in some godforsaken checkpoint, I closed my eyes and pictured that garage back home. I could practically smell the primer, hear the sound of the air compressor kicking on, feel the weight of that perfectly balanced wrench in my hand. It sounds crazy, but that car was like my anchor to home, you know? So naturally, when my deployment finally ended and I caught that freedom bird back to the States, the first thing I wanted to do was get back to that garage and fire her up. I had big plans. Maybe take a cross-country road trip, hit up some car shows, finally get to enjoy the fruits of all that labor. The whole flight home, I'm thinking about how good it's going to feel to hear that V8 rumble to life after 3 years of silence. I pull up to the house around noon, on a Tuesday. Everything looks the same. Same cracked driveway, same peeling paint on the front porch, same neighbor's dog barking at absolutely nothing. But as I'm walking toward the garage, I can still smell it. That distinctive scent of fresh paint and metal polish that always lingered in there after we'd been working. Made me smile, honestly, like she was waiting for me. I grabbed the garage door handle and give it that little lift and twist that it always needed. The mechanism was quirky, but I knew exactly how to work it. The door rolls up, and I'm already grinning, ready to see my beautiful black beast sitting there under the car cover, just like I left her. Instead, I'm staring at empty concrete. Nothing but oil stains and some old cardboard boxes stacked in the corner. For a second, I actually thought I was in the wrong garage. Like maybe I got confused after being overseas for so long. But no, there were my old tools still hanging on the pegboard. There was the workbench with the coffee cup rings I'd left behind. This was definitely the right place. So where the hell was my car? I spin around and march straight into the kitchen, where Mom's making lunch like it's just another normal Tuesday. She looks up when I walk in, and I can see something shift in her expression, like she's been dreading this exact moment for months. Before I can even ask the question, she's already got that guilty look parents get when they know they messed up big time. Dad walks in from the living room, and he's got the same expression. Neither of them is making eye contact. The silence stretches out for what feels like forever before Dad finally clears his throat and drops the bomb. They sold her. My Camaro. The car I'd pour my heart and soul into. The machine I'd dreamed about every single night for 3 years. They sold her for $5,000. $5,000. I'm standing there trying to process this information, and it's like my brain just refuses to compute it. This car that we put at least 15 grand into in parts alone, not counting the hundreds of hours of labor. This car that was easily worth $30,000 in the condition we'd gotten her to. Gone for 5 grand. Mom starts talking, trying to explain their reasoning, but honestly, her words just sound like white noise at this point. Something about how they hadn't heard from me in a while, how they thought maybe I wasn't coming back, how they needed reliable transportation, and the Mazda dealership was having a sale. A Mazda. They traded my custom-built American muscle car for a brand-new Mazda sedan. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was a complete lack of understanding about what that car meant to me. To them, it was just an old project taking up space in the garage. To me, it was 3 years of working side by side with my father, learning skills that actually mattered, creating something beautiful with my own hands. It was every Saturday morning spent at the parts yard, every evening arguing about whether to go with the original 327 or upgrade to a 396. It was our thing. But apparently, our thing wasn't worth waiting 3 years for their son to come home. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I didn't slam doors or make a big dramatic scene. I just looked at both of them for a long moment, turned around, walked out of that house, got in my rental car, and drove away. And honestly, I haven't been back since. So there I was, sitting in my crappy studio apartment that smelled like stale pizza and broken dreams, staring at a notebook full of phone numbers and dead ends. But I wasn't about to give up on finding my Camaro. Not a chance in hell. The first thing I did was pull up every single detail I could remember about that car. VIN number burned into my memory like my own social security number. Engine specifications, custom modifications, even a tiny scratch on the rear bumper from when Dad backed into his own toolbox. I knew that car better than most people know their own children. I started hitting up every car forum, Facebook group, and Craigslist ad within a 500-mile radius. Posted the same message probably 200 times. Black 68 Camaro SS, recently sold, looking to buy back, sentimental value, will pay fair price. The responses I got ranged from helpful to completely useless to downright sketchy. Some guy from Kentucky claimed he had the exact car, but wanted 15 grand sight unseen. Red flag number 1. Another dude in Tennessee kept sending me photos of what was obviously a different year Camaro, insisting it was the same car. These people must think military guys are stupid or something. But I kept digging. Called every classic car dealer in 3 states. Talked to guys at swap meets who knew guys who knew guys. Spent my weekends driving to car shows, walking around like some kind of automotive detective, checking out every black Camaro I could find. Most owners were cool about it, but man, you meet some real characters in this hobby. There was this one old-timer at a show in Nashville who claimed every Camaro in existence had passed through his shop at some point. Spent 20 minutes telling me about a car that sounded exactly like mine, right down to the custom seat covers. Had my hopes up until he mentioned it was a convertible. My car was definitely not a convertible. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday night while I was scrolling through some obscure Texas-based car trading website. Most of the stuff on there was junk, rusted-out pickup trucks and Honda Civics with more miles than NASA spacecraft. But then I saw it. Black 68 Camaro SS, listed as a project car, and the VIN number in the description matched mine exactly. My heart started pounding so hard, I thought I might actually have a medical emergency right there in my apartment. The listing was posted by something called FM Garage, located about 4 hours outside of Dallas. The description was pretty sparse. Just said the car was no longer for sale, currently being restored. Contact for more information. I immediately grabbed my phone and dialed the number. Took 3 rings before someone picked up, and right away I could tell this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. The voice was rough, gravelly, like someone who'd been smoking unfiltered cigarettes since the Carter administration. I tried to keep it simple and honest. Told him I was looking for a specific 68 Camaro, gave him the VIN, explained that it was originally my project and I was hoping to buy it back. The guy listened without saying much, just the occasional grunt to let me know he was still on the line. When I finished explaining, there was this long pause. Then he basically told me the car wasn't for sale anymore, that he'd already started working on it, and I should try looking somewhere else. His tone wasn't exactly hostile, but it definitely wasn't friendly either, like he was doing me a favor by even talking to me. I pressed a little harder, offered to pay above market value, explained that the car had serious sentimental value, even mentioned my military service, which I normally hate doing, but I was getting desperate. The guy just kept saying the same thing. Car's not available. Look somewhere else. Have a nice day. That's when I made what was probably a mistake. I told him the truth about how I'd lost the car, how my parents had sold it while I was deployed, how they'd gotten ripped off on the price, how I'd been searching for months. Figured maybe if he understood the situation, he'd be willing to work with me. Wrong move. Soon as I mentioned that my parents had sold it, his whole attitude changed. Started asking pointed questions about whether I had any legal claim to the car, whether there was any paperwork with my name on it, whether I could prove ownership, all very businesslike and suspicious. When I admitted that technically the car had been in my father's name, the conversation was basically over. He told me he bought the car legally, had all the proper paperwork, and wasn't interested in getting involved in some family drama. Said if I had a problem with the sale, I should take it up with whoever sold it to him in the first place. Then he hung up, just like that. 3 months of searching, and I finally find my car, only get shut down by some guy who probably bought it for peanuts and was planning to flip it for a huge profit. I tried calling back a few times over the next couple of weeks, but he wouldn't pick up. Left a couple of voicemails, but never got a response. Even tried showing up at the address listed on the website, but it turned out to be just a P.O. box at some mail store in a strip mall. So there I was, back to square one. Except now it was worse because I knew exactly where my car was, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. The guy had me over a barrel, and he knew it. Legally speaking, he was completely in the right. My parents had sold the car. He bought it fair and square. End of story. But here's the thing about being in the military. They teach you not to give up when things look impossible. Sometimes you just have to wait for the right opportunity, the right moment when circumstances shift in your favor. I had no idea when or how that might happen, but I wasn't ready to throw in the towel just yet. So there I was, driving back from my dead-end job at a construction site outside Austin, tired as hell, and wondering if I was ever going to see my Camaro again. It was one of those Texas evenings where the sun disappears behind the trees, but the heat just hangs in the air like a wet blanket. I had the windows down in my beat-up Honda because the AC had given up months ago. The road I was taking was this winding two-lane highway through some pretty thick woods. Not much traffic, which was fine by me because I wasn't in the mood for dealing with other drivers. Just want to get home, crack open a beer, and maybe scroll through more car ads that would probably lead nowhere. That's when I saw the headlights cutting through the trees ahead, way off to the right side of the road. At first, I thought maybe someone had pulled over to take a leak or something, but as I got closer, I could see something was seriously wrong. The lights were pointing in all different directions, and there was this weird flickering that didn't look right at all. I slowed down and pulled over onto the shoulder. Soon as I got out of my car, I could smell it, that acrid stench of burning oil and hot metal that every gearhead knows means trouble. There was also this thin column of smoke rising up through the trees, barely visible in the fading daylight. I grabbed a flashlight I keep in my glove compartment and started making my way through the brush toward where I'd seen the lights. Took me maybe 30 seconds to find the source of the problem, and man, it was bad. Some kind of sedan, looked like a newer Toyota or Honda, had gone off the road and slammed into a tree. The front end was completely crumpled. Steam was pouring out from under the hood, and I could hear this electrical crackling sound that made my skin crawl. But the worst part was the voices coming from inside. A woman screaming for help, and what sounded like a little kid crying. The driver's side door was pinned shut against a tree, and for what I could see, the passenger side wasn't looking much better. I ran up to the car and tried the passenger door first. Jammed solid. The woman inside was maybe 25, dark hair, covered in blood from what looked like a cut on her forehead. She was holding a little girl who couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 years old. Both of them were absolutely terrified. The woman was pounding on the window, trying to tell me something, but I couldn't hear her clearly over the sound of the engine making all kinds of horrible noises. What I could see was that the smoke from under the hood was getting thicker, and there were these little orange flickers that definitely were not supposed to be there. Now, I'm no expert on car fires, but I spent enough time around vehicles in the Army to know that when you start seeing flames near the engine compartment, you've got maybe a minute or two before things get really ugly really fast. And these two were stuck in there like fish in a barrel. I tried the back doors. Same story. The impact had twisted the whole frame, and nothing was opening the normal way. The woman was getting more panicked by the second, and the little girl had gone from crying to that kind of silent terror that's somehow even worse. That's when the training kicked in. 3 years of dealing with emergency situations in combat zones teaches you to think fast and act faster when people's lives are on the line. I looked around for something heavy and found a decent-sized rock near the base of the tree they'd hit. I yelled at the woman to cover herself and the kid, then brought that rock down on the passenger side window as hard as I could. Took 3 hits before it finally gave way, sending safety glass everywhere. Soon as I had an opening, I reached in and started working on getting them out. The woman went first. She was conscious but pretty shaky. Definitely had a concussion from the way she was moving. Had to basically lift her out through the window opening because her legs weren't working quite right. Got her clear of the car and told her to stay back. Then came the hard part. The little girl was scared out of her mind and didn't want to come to some stranger. Can't say I blamed her. But the smoke was getting worse, and I could actually see flames start to lick up from underneath the engine block. I had to climb halfway into that car to get to her. And let me tell you, being inside a vehicle that's about to catch fire is not an experience I'd recommend to anybody. The smell of burning plastic and leaking fluids was overwhelming, and the heat was already getting intense. Finally managed to get the kid out, and not a second too soon. I was maybe 20 feet away from the car, carrying this little girl while her mom stumbled along beside me, when the whole front end went up in flames. We're talking full-blown car fire, the kind you see in movies, except this time it's real, and you can feel the heat on your back. We sat there on the side of the road for maybe 10 minutes, just catching our breath and making sure everybody was okay. The woman, turned out her name was Kira, kept thanking me over and over while trying to call 911 on the phone with a completely shattered screen. I used my phone to call for emergency services, and while we were waiting for them to show up, she told me what had happened. Some deer had run out in front of her car. She'd swerved to avoid it, overcorrected, and ended up taking that unplanned detour through the forest. Could have happened to anybody, really. The fire department showed up first, followed by an ambulance and a couple of state troopers. Standard procedure stuff, statements, insurance information, medical checks. Kira and her daughter were both okay, just shaken up and dealing with some minor cuts and bruises. The paramedics wanted to take them to the hospital for observation, but Kira insisted she was fine. That's when she asked if I could give them a ride home. Her car was obviously totaled, and she didn't want to deal with waiting around for a tow truck or trying to explain the situation to some relative over phone. Said she lived about 15 minutes down the road. So I loaded them into my Honda and started following her directions deeper into the countryside. We were talking about random stuff, where I was from, what I did for work, how long she'd been living in Texas. Normal conversation, nothing too heavy. The little girl had fallen asleep in the back seat, which was probably the best thing for her after everything that had just happened. About 20 minutes later, we pulled into the driveway of this really nice house set back from the road. Not a mansion or anything, but definitely the kind of place that costs some serious money. Big front porch, well-maintained yard, couple of expensive-looking trucks parked out front. As we're getting out of the car, this older guy comes out of the house, probably in his 50s, built like he'd spent most of his life doing manual labor, with the kind of weathered face that suggested he didn't smile very often. Soon as he saw Kira with her bandaged forehead and the sleeping kid in her arms, his expression went from curious to seriously concerned. But here's the thing that made my heart skip a beat. Sitting right there in the driveway, covered by a tarp but unmistakably familiar in its proportions, was a car that looked exactly like my '68 Camaro. And that's when I realized I was about to have the most important conversation of my entire life with a man who'd been hanging up on me for the past 6 months. So there I am, standing in this guy's driveway, looking at what I'm 99% sure is my stolen Camaro, while his daughter is thanking me for saving her life. Talk about your awkward situations. I'm trying to process everything that just happened while also trying to figure out if I should mention the car thing right now or wait for a better moment. The older guy, who I'm assuming is the same gruff voice that's been hanging up on me for months, is helping Kira get the little girl inside while asking a million questions about the accident. What happened? Was she hurt? Did she need to go to the hospital? That sort of concerned father stuff. But I could feel him glancing at me every few seconds, like he was trying to figure out who I was and why I was still standing in his driveway. After they got the kids settled inside, Kira came back out and started telling her dad the whole story. How I'd pulled him out of the burning car. How I'd probably saved both their lives. How she didn't know what would have happened if I hadn't come along when I did. The whole time she's talking, this guy is looking at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. Finally, he walks over and sticks out his hand. Tells me his name is Frank. thanks me for what I did, asks if there's anything he can do to repay me. Standard grateful parent routine, which I totally understood. If someone had saved my kid's life, I'd probably react the same way. That's when I made the decision to just lay it all out there. Figured I had nothing to lose at this point, and the cosmic coincidence of the whole situation was just too weird to ignore. So I told him my name was Nick, and that I'd been trying to get in touch with him for months about buying back a car that used to belong to me. The change in his expression was immediate and dramatic. Went from grateful and friendly to suspicious, and guarded in about half a second. He glanced over at the covered Camaro, then back at me, and I could practically see the wheels turning in his head. He asked me to prove it was my car. So I started rattling off details that only the original builder would know. The custom exhaust system with the specific muffler setup. The non-original steering wheel we'd swapped in because the factory one was cracked. The tiny dent in the rear quarter panel from when Dad dropped a wrench. The aftermarket gauges we'd installed in the dash. Even the specific shade of black paint. Not factory original, but modern automotive finish that looked better under different lighting conditions. With every detail I mentioned, Frank's expression got a little more uncomfortable. By the time I finished describing the custom interior work, he was looking like a man who just realized he might have made a serious mistake. That's when he invited me inside for a beer, and what turned out to be one of the strangest conversations of my life. We sat at his kitchen table, while Kira was upstairs getting her daughter cleaned up and ready for bed. Frank cracked open a couple of Budweisers and started talking. Turns out, he'd known something was off about that car from the moment he bought it. Said he'd been in the restoration business for almost 30 years, and he could usually tell within 5 minutes whether a car was a genuine project or just some piece of junk someone was trying to unload. My Camaro, he said, was clearly something special. Every single component had been carefully chosen and properly installed. The metalwork was professional quality, the kind of stuff you only see when someone really knows what they're doing and isn't cutting corners to save money. The engine had been completely rebuilt with high-end parts, and all the custom modifications had been done right. Frank told me he'd paid $7,500 for the car, which was already way more than the $5,000 my parents had supposedly gotten for it. Somebody had been making money in the middle of that transaction, and it wasn't my family. That part made me angrier than everything else combined, honestly. But here's where it gets interesting. Frank said he'd started working on the car almost immediately after buying it, but the more he dug into it, the more guilty he felt. He could tell it wasn't just some random project car. It was somebody's baby, somebody's dream machine that they put serious time and love into building. He'd actually tried to track down the original owner, but the paperwork trail was a mess. The guy who sold it to him claimed he'd bought it from some family in Oklahoma who needed quick cash, but the story kept changing every time Frank asked for more details. So when I started calling and then showing up looking for a specific '68 Camaro, Frank had put 2 and 2 together pretty quickly. Problem was, he'd already started his own restoration work on the car and had probably $8,000 invested in parts and labor. He couldn't just give it back without taking a serious financial hit. But now, after I'd literally saved his daughter and granddaughter from burning to death in a car wreck, the whole situation had taken on a completely different dimension. He looked at me across that kitchen table and said something I'll never forget. He told me he'd been in the military too, back during Desert Storm, and he understood what it meant to come home and find out that the people who were supposed to have your back had let you down instead. Said he'd been thinking about our phone conversation for months, wondering if he was doing the right thing. Then he made me an offer I couldn't believe. He'd sell me back the car for exactly what he'd paid for it, $7,500, plus the cost of the parts he'd already installed. No markup, no profit, just his actual costs. Said it was the least he could do for someone who'd risked his life to save his family. I told him I appreciated the offer, but there was no way I could come up with that kind of money anytime soon. My construction job barely covered rent and groceries, and I definitely didn't have $15,000 sitting around in savings. That's when Frank surprised me again. He said he'd hold the car for me, let me make payments over time, whatever worked with my budget. No interest, no penalties if I was late with a payment. Just a handshake deal between 2 veterans who understood what it meant to keep your word. We shook hands right there in his kitchen, and for the first time in months, I actually felt like things might work out okay. Frank took me out to the garage to show me what he'd been working on, and man, seeing that car again was like being reunited with a long-lost friend. He'd actually improved it in some ways, upgraded the brake system, rebuilt the transmission, added some modern safety features that didn't change the original look, but made it a much better car to actually drive. All high-quality work that probably would have cost me twice as much if I'd had to pay someone else to do it. 6 months later, I made my final payment to Frank. The car was finally, legally, officially mine again. But more than that, I gained something I hadn't expected. A friend who understood what that car meant to me and who'd gone out his way to make things right. Sometimes the best things in life come from the worst situations. And sometimes the people who seem like your enemies turn out to be exactly the allies you needed all along. Fast forward 18 months, and my life had completely turned around. Getting my Camaro back wasn't just about the car itself. It was like getting back a piece of my soul that I didn't even realize was missing. Frank and I had become genuine friends, and he'd been teaching me advanced restoration techniques that you can't learn from YouTube videos. The construction job was history. I'd taken every dollar I could scrape together, borrowed some money from Frank, and opened up my own small restoration shop in a rented garage on the outskirts of town. Nothing fancy, just a couple of lifts, some good tools, and a reputation that was slowly building among local car enthusiasts. My first real customer was a guy with a '67 Mustang that had been sitting in his barn for 20 years. He'd seen my Camaro at a local car show and asked who'd done the work. When I told him I'd built it myself, he wanted to know if I could bring his Mustang back to life. 6 months later, that car was featured in a regional automotive magazine. Word spreads fast in the car community, especially when you do quality work at fair prices. Soon I had more projects than I could handle. Classic Chevelles, vintage Corvettes, even a few Mopars that Chevy guys like me weren't supposed to enjoy working on. But a beautiful car is a beautiful car, regardless of what badge is on the grill. The business was doing well enough that I started thinking about finding a bigger location, maybe hiring an assistant. I was actually happy for the first time in years, doing work I loved and making decent money at it. The American dream, right there in a greasy garage with classic rock playing on the radio. That's when my parents decided to make their grand reappearance in my life. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was under the hood of a '69 Charger R/T, trying to diagnose why the carburetor was running so rich. Heard the shop door open and figured it was either my parts delivery or another potential customer. Didn't think much of it until I heard that familiar voice calling my name. I rolled out from under the car to find both my parents standing there looking uncomfortable and out of place. Mom was clutching some kind of paperwork, and Dad was doing that thing where he pretends to be interested in the cars while actually avoiding eye contact. Both of them looked older and smaller than I remembered, like the last couple years hadn't been particularly kind to them. They'd obviously heard about my business somehow, probably through mutual acquaintances, or maybe they'd seen the article in the magazine. Mom was doing her best to sound proud and supportive, talking about how she'd always known I was good with cars, how she wasn't surprised I made a success of it. All I could think about was how they'd sold my car for $5,000 while I was risking my life overseas. How they'd figured I probably wasn't coming back anyway, so why keep some old project taking up space in the garage? How they bought themselves a brand new Mazda with the money, and then acted like they'd done me some kind of favor. Dad finally worked up the courage to get to the point. They were having some financial difficulties. Medical bills, credit card debt, something about the mortgage being underwater. The usual middle-class American disaster story. They'd heard I was doing well with the shop, and they wondered if I might be able to help them out. Just temporarily, of course. Just until they got back on their feet. The paperwork Mom was holding turned out to be loan documents and past due notices. They needed about $15,000 to avoid losing the house. Had already talked to the bank about refinancing, but their credit was shot and they couldn't qualify for anything with decent terms. I stood there looking at these two people who'd raised me, who'd taught me how to work with my hands, who'd been there for Little League games and high school graduation. But I also saw the people who decided that a car I'd built with my own sweat and tears was worth less than their immediate convenience. They kept talking about how they knew they'd made a mistake with the Camaro, how they should have waited for me to come home, how they were sorry for not understanding what it meant to me. Mom even started crying a little bit, which was probably genuine but felt calculated at the same time. The thing is, I probably could have helped them. The shop was profitable. I had some money in savings, and 15 grand wasn't to bankrupt me. Part of me wanted to be the bigger person, to prove that I'd moved past their betrayal and was ready to be a good son again. But another part of me, the part that had been carrying around this hurt and anger for almost 3 years, wasn't ready to let them off the hook that easily. They'd made a choice when they thought I wasn't coming back. Now they wanted to make another choice, this time assuming I would come through for them. I told them I needed some time to think about it, asked them to leave their contact information, and said I'd get back to them in a few days. They seemed encouraged by that, like maybe there was hope for getting the money they needed. After they left, I sat in my shop for a long time, just thinking. Frank stopped by later that evening. He had a habit of dropping in after work to see what projects I was working on. I told him about the visit and asked what he thought I should do. Frank listened to the whole story without saying much, just nodding occasionally and sipping his beer. When I finished, he was quiet for a minute before giving me probably the best advice I'd ever received. He said that helping people who'd hurt you wasn't about whether they deserved it. It was about whether you could live with yourself afterward. That whatever I decided, I should make sure it was something I could look back on in 20 years without regret. I thought about that for 3 days. Thought about forgiveness and family obligations and what it means to be a good person. Thought about the car they'd sold and the trust they'd broken and whether money could fix any of that. In the end, I decided to help them, but not in the way they'd expected. Instead of giving them $15,000, I paid off their mortgage directly through the bank, took care of the medical bills too, and set up a modest monthly allowance that would keep them comfortable without being extravagant. But I also made sure they understood that this wasn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. It was about me choosing to be better than they'd been when they had the chance to choose. I didn't want their gratitude, and I didn't want them thinking this meant we were good again. I told them I'd take care of their financial problems because they were my parents and because I could afford to do it. But the relationship they damaged when they sold my car, that was something money couldn't fix. That was going to take time, if it could be fixed at all. They took the help, of course, moved into a smaller, more manageable house that I bought and put in their names. Started making noises about wanting to rebuild our relationship, about family being more important than old grudges. Maybe someday I'll be ready for that conversation. Maybe someday I'll be able to look at them and not think about coming home from war to find an empty garage. But that day hasn't come yet, and I'm not sure it ever will. What I do know is that I sleep better at night, knowing I did the right thing, even if it wasn't the easy thing. Sometimes being a good person means helping people who don't deserve it. And sometimes it means setting boundaries that protect your own peace of mind. My Camaro is still in my garage, right where it belongs. And that's all that really matters to me.